broadcasting live from somewhere in occupied San Juan County, Washington. Welcome to the San Juan Lighthouse Report, where we bring you the latest news and gossip from around the county. So today we're doing one of our deep dives, and this one, well, it really stretches the idea of local news, doesn't it? We started, looking at updates from the Island Sounder over in East Sound.
Right, your typical island beat reporting.
Exactly, thinking ferry schedules, local events, that sort of thing. But instead, we suddenly found ourselves right in the middle of this really high-stakes international situation.
Yeah, involving detention at sea, a huge political protest, and then this rapid-fire U.S. diplomatic effort.
Yeah.
Like right up to the State Department level.
It's just a fascinating example, really, of how something happening right here in San Juan County can suddenly be connected to global geopolitics.
Absolutely. And that's our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? To really dig into the sources we have, figure out how San Juan County got linked to this incident involving Israeli authorities and this massive Global Sumud Flotilla. So we need to piece together the timeline, especially around the detention of this Orcas Island resident.
Yeah.
What was the context? What was this big action at sea all about? And crucially, what did the U.S. have to do diplomatically to get her released?
And the thing that really struck me reading through this was just the speed, the velocity of it all. You've got a resident from, a pretty quiet community out here in the Pacific Northwest. She takes part in something thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
And bam, within like 48 hours, her being detained is getting serious attention from her congressman, the U.S. Embassy over in Israel, even the State Department back in D.C.
It's quite something. And it really shows, the kind of diplomatic machinery that kicks in when a U.S. citizen is involved overseas. That's why this story is so relevant, I think. It shows how the system is supposed to work to protect Americans abroad.
Okay, so let's start where the story kind of bubbled up locally, right here in San Juan County, Washington.
Right.
The person at the heart of this is named Jasmine Ikeda, and the local reporting specifically says she's a resident of Orcas Island.
And that's key, isn't it? That specific local connection is why the Island Sounder broke the news first. Suddenly, this small local paper is covering a major international incident.
Yeah, imagine being the editor there for those few days.
Right. But that local tie immediately changes things. It's not just some abstract political event anymore. It's about a specific person, a neighbor, a constituent.
And the detention itself happened on October 1st, 2025. Can you imagine the shock waves in that community?
Oh, absolutely. Hearing that someone from your island has been taken into custody by a foreign military after, well, a pretty controversial event at sea, that immediate personal link, that's what really triggers the political and diplomatic response we saw.
And let's be clear, the detention wasn't exactly a surprise given what she was doing, right? The sources are very clear this happened because she chose to participate in this big confrontational action.
The Global Sumud Flotilla.
Yes, it wasn't like she was just sailing randomly. This was a direct consequence of being part of that specific action.
Exactly. Which means, before we even talk about the diplomacy side, we really need to understand the flotilla itself. What was it? What were they trying to do?
Okay, yeah. Let's unpack this.
Oh.
What exactly was this flotilla?
Because that detention, it's the end point of a very deliberate, very organized strategy of, nonviolent confrontation. You can't really grasp the U.S. response without understanding the scale and the politics of what came before it.
Okay, so let's dive into the flotilla then. The source materials we have, they give us these mission statements, right? They paint a pretty clear picture.
They do. It was described as a coordinated, nonviolent fleet.
Yeah.
And its stated aim was very explicit, to break what the organizers called Israel's illegal siege on Gaza.
And they use that specific term, sumud. You mentioned that earlier. Arabic for steadfastness, resilience.
Right. That name itself tells you a lot. This wasn't just about delivering boxes of aid. It was meant as a symbolic act, too. A demonstration of resistance, of perseverance.
So the goals were pretty ambitious, politically charged.
Extremely. You could say they had twin goals. First, yes, open a humanitarian corridor. Get aid in directly, bypassing the land routes, which they argued were too restrictive.
Okay.
But second, and maybe even more significantly, they wanted to signal their intent to end what the organizers explicitly called the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people.
Wow. Okay, so that's way beyond just delivering supplies. That's a direct challenge to the entire blockade, its legality, its morality.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It frames the whole action in very stark political terms.
And looking at who was involved, this wasn't just a couple of activists in a sailboat.
Yeah.
The sources call it the largest coordinated civilian flotilla in history.
Yeah, that phrase jumps out. It suggests, serious planning, significant resources, international coordination over a long period, not something thrown together quick.
So who was actually on these boats?
Well, the sources paint a picture of a really diverse coalition. Deliberately diverse, I'd argue. It wasn't just activists. They list organizers, doctors, clergy members, lawyers, and, importantly, experienced seafarers. Yes, and people from established human rights groups, political movements. It seems they drew participants from all sorts of backgrounds, likely to broaden the political support and maybe make it harder for Israel to dismiss them all as just, troublemakers. Having doctors and lawyers detained looks different.
And the international aspect you mentioned.
Huge. The sources say delegations from 39 countries were committed to sailing. 39.
Okay, that explains a lot. So when Jasmine Ikeda was detained, it wasn't just a U.S.-Israel issue. It was instantly a multinational problem for Israel.
Exactly right. Detaining citizens from nearly 40 countries simultaneously, that dramatically increases the diplomatic pressure compared to dealing with just one or two nations.
And how did they actually plan to operate? What was the strategy with the boats themselves?
It seems they learned from past flotillas. Instead of using one or two very large cargo ships, which are, frankly, easier to intercept and control.
Right, like sitting ducks, almost.
Sort of, yeah. They went for a more decentralized approach. Lots of small to mid-sized vessels. The sources mention one called the Madeleine as an example.
Okay, decentralized. Using smaller boats. Why is that strategically better in this kind of situation, facing a naval blockade?
Well, think about it from a few angles. Operationally, it's just much harder for a Navy to track, intercept, and board, say, 20 smaller, more agile boats spread out, compared to stopping one big one.
Makes sense. Spreads their forces thin.
Right. And legally, or maybe politically legally, it distributes the risk. If one boat gets seized, the whole mission isn't necessarily over. Others might continue, or at least the incident generates more separate events for the media and diplomats to track. It's more resilient.
Less of a single point of failure.
Exactly. It avoids putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Right.
It also probably empowered more groups to participate with their own vessels.
Okay, that makes sense strategically. Now, what about their legal justification? They didn't just sail in saying, we feel like it. They claimed they had a right to be there.
Oh, absolutely. This was a core part of their strategy. They were very clear in stating their action was legal under international law. This wasn't just a PR claim. It was meant as a serious legal position.
So what was the argument specifically? How did they justify sailing towards a declared blockade?
Their argument hinged on defining the Israeli blockade of Gaza itself as illegal. Specifically, they argued it constitutes collective punishment against the civilian population by restricting food, medicine, movement, essentials.
Okay. And collective punishment is forbidden.
Explicitly forbidden under the Fourth Geneva Convention. So their logic was, if the blockade is illegal collective punishment, then civilian ships trying to deliver humanitarian aid or peacefully protest against it, especially in international waters, are acting legally. They framed their flotilla as an attempt to challenge an ongoing violation of international law.
That's a bold legal claim, but sailing into a zone that Israel considers a security zone, regardless of the legal debate, that's still incredibly risky.
No doubt. And the organizers knew it. The sources state they explicitly acknowledged the risks. They pointed to Israel's history of using force against previous flotillas. They weren't naive about the potential consequences.
And why do it? What was their calculation?
It seems their bet was on the sheer scale and the international spotlight. With 39 nations involved, hundreds of participants, doctors, lawyers, they calculated that the political cost for Israel to use significant force or to hold people indefinitely would be too high.
Ah, okay. Safety in numbers, but also safety in diplomatic complexity.
Precisely. They believed the international attention would force Israel to handle the situation through relatively quick detention and deportation, rather than risk a violent confrontation or a drawn-out legal battle that would keep the issue in the headlines.
And they seemed prepared for the interception itself?
Yes. The sources mentioned participants had nonviolence training, safety prep. They fully expected to be stopped. Part of the strategy seemed to be getting stopped to generate that diplomatic incident.
And choosing the sea route was deliberate for other reasons, too, right? You mentioned the land routes earlier.
Correct. They argued that trying to get aid through established land crossings was often impossible or heavily controlled. They used strong language, saying aid is often delayed, restricted, or even, quote, turned into deadly traps.
Strong words.
Very. So for them, the sea route represented a way to bypass those controls, a direct, unambiguous act of solidarity, even knowing it would lead to interception.
Which brings us to the interception itself. The flotilla's description, according to our sources, was that participants were intercepted and kidnapped by Israeli forces.
Yes, kidnapped is obviously highly charged political language. It's part of their framing to emphasize the non-consensual nature of the interception in what they considered international or Palestinian waters and the international makeup of those detained.
But practically speaking, they sailed against the blockade and they were stopped and detained.
That's the operational reality, yes. And the flotilla statement was clear about the expected outcome. Those captured would face imprisonment, being, as they put it, punished for their solidarity and courage.
And the moment that happens, the moment Jasmine Ikeda is detained,
The focus shifts instantly. The flotilla's grand political aims become secondary, at least for the U.S. government. Now, it's purely about the safety, rights, and release of a detained American citizen.
which brings the whole crisis right back home, doesn't it, to Washington State, Orcas Island.
Directly. An American citizen detained by a foreign power that immediately gets the attention of their elected representatives. In this case, U.S. Representative Rick Larsen, whose district includes the San Juan Islands.
And his response was fast.
Very fast. The sources say he issued a formal statement from his office in Everett, Washington on Friday, October 3rd. That's just 2 days after the detention on the 1st. That speed isn't accidental. It reflects how seriously the U.S. government takes the detention of its citizens abroad, regardless of the circumstances leading up to it. It becomes a matter of consular responsibility, even sovereignty.
And this really gets to the heart of why this matters to Americans generally, right? It doesn't matter what you think of the flotilla's goals or Jasmine Ikeda's decision to participate. Once an American is in foreign custody,
The system kicks in. The State Department has procedures, obligations. Representative Larsen's actions, detailed in the sources, are basically a textbook example of how that system is supposed to work.
what did he do specifically?
First, crucially, his office confirmed they were in direct contact with Jasmine Ikeda's family and were acting with their permission. That's standard practice. You need the family's consent for privacy reasons and coordination.
Right.
Then, he reached out to the State Department, and he specifically requested that the U.S. Embassy in Israel get involved and provide certain things. The sources list 4 specific demands.
Okay, let's break those down, because these 4 points really show what the U.S. government does in these situations. What was the first one?
First, demand full and timely consular services. This is fundamental. It means a U.S. consular official must be allowed to visit the detained citizen pronto.
And what does the consul do? Are they like a lawyer?
Not exactly a lawyer, no. Their job is to check on the person's welfare. Are they okay? Do they need medical attention? They help facilitate communication with family back home, explain the local legal process in general terms, provide a list of local lawyers if needed. Just having that official U.S. presence there is a check against mistreatment.
Okay, that makes sense. What was the second demand?
Second, monitoring to ensure humane treatment while she was in custody. This goes a bit beyond just the visit. It's about ensuring the conditions of detention meet international standards.
Like no abuse, access to food and water, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Preventing things like torture, degrading treatment, ensuring basic needs are met. The embassy would be pushing for assurances and potentially follow-up visits to confirm humane conditions.
Got it. Third demand.
Third was guaranteeing legal due process. This is about fairness within the Israeli legal system. It means ensuring she knew what, if any, charges she faced, had access to a lawyer, and would get a fair hearing according to Israeli law and international norms.
So the U.S. isn't saying ignore your laws, but apply your laws fairly.
Precisely. The U.S. can't dictate the outcome, but it insists the process itself must be transparent and just.
And the fourth demand. This sounds like the main goal.
It is. The fourth demand was advocacy for her immediate release. While the first 3 are about ensuring safety and rights during detention, this one is about ending the detention altogether. Leveraging U.S. diplomatic influence to argue for her freedom, perhaps deportation, especially given the context nonviolent protests, political nature of the detention.
So consular access, humane treatment, due process, and push for release. That's the package.
That's the standard diplomatic toolkit. And seeing it laid out like this really clarifies why this matters. It shows the mechanisms the U.S. uses to protect its citizens abroad, no matter how messy the international situation is. It's about asserting that American citizens have rights, and the U.S. government will back them up.
And it's fascinating that this whole process, this activation of high-level diplomacy, essentially started with a call from Jasmine Ikeda's family on Orcas Island to their local congressman's office.
It really highlights that link between local constituent service and global diplomacy. It's quite direct.
So did all this diplomatic pressure work? What was the outcome?
Well, the good news, according to the sources, is yes. It seems it did, and remarkably quickly. Jasmine Ikeda was released from Israeli custody.
Okay, great. And the timing? You said it was fast.
Extremely fast. The report of her release came out about 15 hours before our sources were compiled on October 7th. So if she was detained on October 1st.
It's roughly a week, maybe less. Detention to release in under 7 days.
Yeah, for an international incident involving detention after a major political protest, that's incredibly quick. It really suggests that the combination of factors, the flotilla's planning, the multinational pressure, and especially the focused U.S. diplomatic intervention worked.
The political cost of holding them must have escalated rapidly.
That's the likely calculation, yes.
Yeah.
The hassle just wasn't worth it, especially with potentially 39 countries complaining. And significantly, she wasn't the only one released.
Oh.
The sources state clearly she was released along with 20 other Americans.
20 others. So 21 Americans were detained and released together.
That's what the reporting indicates, which tells us this wasn't just about Rick Larsen fighting for his constituent, though that was vital. It points to a coordinated State Department effort to secure the release of all the detained U.S. citizens from the flotilla at the same time.
A bulk negotiation, essentially.
Seems very likely. Getting 21 people released simultaneously from foreign custody requires some serious diplomatic legwork, coordinating with Israeli authorities, and probably managing the logistics of their departure.
Speaking of departure, how did they get home? Did they just fly out of Israel?
Not quite directly, according to the sources. It says she was deported to Jordan first. And from Jordan, she was scheduled to fly back to the U.S. that same week.
Jordan! Why do stopover? Why not just fly straight home?
Using a third country like Jordan is actually a pretty standard procedure in these kinds of sensitive release situations.
Really? Why?
Well, a few reasons. It can smooth over jurisdictional issues or political sensitivities. Maybe Israel didn't want the political optic of these activists flying out directly from Tel Aviv after challenging the blockade. Deporting them to a neighboring, relatively neutral country like Jordan provides a buffer.
A sort of neutral transfer point?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jordan acts as a transit hub. It allows Israel to say they've been deported, and then the U.S. can arrange onward travel from Amman without the direct political friction of managing it all on Israeli soil immediately after release. It's a logistical and political convenience.
So putting it all together, this local story from Orcas Island was actually just one part of a much bigger picture. A coordinated international detention involving at least 21 Americans, and then a rapid coordinated diplomatic effort leading to their release and deportation via a third country, all within about a week.
That's the crux of it. That tight timeline, October 1st to around October 7th, really underscores the effectiveness of that U.S. diplomatic response once it was triggered. It wasn't just talk. It resulted in action and quickly.
Okay, so we've traced this whole arc. From a local resident joining an international protest to detention to this flurry of diplomacy and finally release. What are the big takeaways here? What does this all really mean, especially for someone listening, maybe even someone in San Juan County?
I think the main takeaway is seeing that intersection of individual action and state protection in action. You have a citizen engaging in a risky, nonviolent political act internationally.
Right.
She faces the consequences detention. But almost immediately, that triggers a very specific, robust response from her government through her representative and the State Department. And that response works, securing her freedom and the freedom of 20 other Americans very quickly.
It really shows the power the U.S. government can wield when it decides to prioritize a citizen's release.
It does. And importantly, the focus wasn't on judging her actions, but on ensuring her rights and safety as an American citizen were protected during detention and then securing her release.
Yeah.
That duty seems to supersede the politics of the situation she was involved in.
That's a key point. The protection applies regardless of whether officials agreed with her protest.
Exactly. Now, reflecting on the flotilla's own strategy, they chose the sea route specifically because they felt land routes were blocked or compromised. They called them deadly traps.
Yeah.
Their action was designed to provoke a response, to force the issue onto the international stage. And in a way, they got exactly what they expected. Interception, detention.
So if their goal was just delivering aid, you could say they failed, right? The boats didn't get through.
True. The physical aid likely didn't reach Gaza via the flotilla itself. But if a major goal was to create an international incident, to force diplomatic intervention, to raise the political cost for Israel maintaining the blockade.
Then maybe they succeeded, getting 21 Americans detained and needing high-level U.S. intervention to get them out within a week? That's certainly raising the stakes.
It definitely created a significant diplomatic headache, which leads us to that final thought to leave you with.
Okay.
Considering everything the flotilla's careful planning, the legal arguments, the massive international attention, the fact that it required this rapid diplomatic scramble to secure the release of these 21 Americans, how effective really is this strategy of nonviolent confrontation in these contested zones? Does the act of getting detained and forcing your home country to intervene diplomatically actually become the most powerful tool? Does that personal risk translate directly into political leverage for future missions, maybe more effectively than the aid delivery itself might have? It makes you wonder about the true calculus of these kinds of protests.
That's definitely something to think about. Does the disruption and the diplomatic fallout become the primary objective? Fascinating. Thanks for tuning in to the San Juan Lighthouse Report. Remember, whatever you do in life, be real and be awesome.